All right, welcome back to another episode of the Grizzly Brothers podcast. And we've talked about doing this for a long time, and this is the first time we've done it. We have a subscriber, follower on the channel. He's asked us some really great questions, so he was kind enough to come on and ask those questions on a podcast. We can do it more like conversational format. So meet Tyler. Tyler, introduce yourself. Tell us about what you do and how you got into hunting and what brings you here.
Hi, well, I'm just a college student trying to figure out how to shoot a deer, but I do a lot of hunting. I really like it. I grew up fishing, born in New York, moved to LA when I was really young, so spent most of my life there, and there's not a lot to do there, but growing up, I was in Boy Scouts, did like backpacking every weekend when I was in middle school and like into high school, and my uncle back east was really into hunting, so I would go over there and like starting when I was a sophomore, I started going over there every year or two trying to get a deer, and he knew a lot. So it was really humbling to see, like he'd set me up on a drive, he'd go back, and every single time where he set me, I almost got ran over by deer, and he just knew in every property where to go. And like seeing that kind of knowledge like played out over somebody who learned on his own was like crazy to me. So seeing that just kind of ignited a spark in me to try to get that on myself,
Mm-hmm. So that's whitetail hunting, obviously.
Yeah.
You live in California, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how much time have you spent? How many years have you spent hunting blacktails or mule deer in California?
Last year was my first real year. I've been a couple times before that, but started hunting the B zones up north. Saw a few when I first went out, my first couple trips in archery, but after that the second weekend of after opener, didn't see anything else, but did some hiking. I like to do like backpacking. I grew up backpacking, so getting off the road, getting away from people, that's always my thing. I like to get away and like see the country. So really about a year now has been like the main drive of me branching out and trying to figure stuff out on my own.
Mm-hmm. I'm always interested to hear like what people's takeaways are that come from Eastern hunting or Southern hunting of whitetails and private land and like really dense stuff with, like you said, drives or tree stands or whatever, and then coming out west, it's a whole different dynamic. We've ran into Eastern hunters out in the elk woods or whatever. And so what's after year one of really being out there and hunting on your own, what's your takeaway in terms of hunting blacktails compared to Eastern whitetail hunting?
Going into it, like I'd always seen like the videos and like shows of people Western hunting, spot and stalk and all that. And before I started hunting, that's what I was envisioning. B-zone is not like that though, like you can't see anything. So I kind of had to like adjust that approach to more of like still hunting. And I like it a lot more. I can sit all day if I need to and not move.
That's
more like 4 hours really. But I mean, I like being like more active, I guess. Yeah. It does suck though, because I mean, you see a lot of animals and like even just like the squirrels running around is entertaining.
Yeah. It's funny because I think all of us who started out Western hunting, we have like the patience of a squirrel. So it's like seeing squirrels is about the most I get, and then I'm out. I'm gone. Like, okay, cool. A couple squirrels. I sat here for probably a whole hour. I'm gonna go chase the deer down now. So it's like it's a two-edged sword because we're used to that style of hunting where, we spot and stalk or go to vantage points and glass, and especially once you get better at glassing, which sounds like funny. People think, oh, you just look through binoculars and see if there's anything or not. Well, there's more to it than that, but when you get better at it, you can pick a place apart pretty quick, depending on the place and how far you're looking, all that kind of stuff. And then you're like, all right, I'm gonna move to the next ridge and get a different vantage, either into the same spot or over that way. And then maybe I'll come back and hit this ridge and glass this spot, because animals move around, get up out of beds. So there's kind of a bunch of theories around that about people that will sit in one spot all day long, even Western hunting, and just glass a spot. And that's productive. Like, honestly, we miss a lot of deer when we sit in glass for an hour and move, because deer are bedding and then they'll stand up and you can see a spot for 5 hours. And then all of a sudden there's a deer standing there. And it's like, just it magically appeared. Well, he was bedded where you couldn't see him and he stood up. So, yeah, I mean, it's all about playing your strengths, though, because I think you can beat your head against the wall. And it's good to, like you said, adapt. You thought about, oh, I'm going to go into it, spot and stalk, glass and all this stuff. But then you learned, okay, it's more productive if I still hunt and slow walk the ridges or the valleys or whatever you're doing. So it's good to adapt that way. But yeah, I think that's the story of hunting. It's all location specific and animal specific. Deer in different areas act different, and we just gotta. If you get stuck in your one kind of hunting, you're going to be missing so many opportunities. You got to adapt to whatever's in front of you. So,
yeah, that's true.
Do we want to get into questions or what, or how do we want to do this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
I know we had you put together some questions ahead of time in addition to the ones you had sent us on the channel. So if you have those, just jump into it. We'll go from there. This will be fun.
All right. Yeah. So one of the problems I've been having is trying to figure out how to maximize my time, because of I live in a pretty rural area, but to get to the public land takes an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to it. So I guess I'll jump in with how do you know if a spot's not producing? Because if I've got some spots that you don't see a lot of sign, but I've also been in those spots and there's tons of deer sometimes. You'll see 6 deer in the same ridge, but then other times of the year you'll go there's nothing and there's not a lot of droppings. So at what point do you decide this spot probably won't produce? Do you go back?
That's a great question. That's a big question, actually. But I'll give you a quick example of the area near me, right by my home. My family and I actually call this one spot Deer Hill, and there's a reason, obviously. There'll be 15 or 20 deer on this hill every single time we drive by it. It's near a road in a rural area, by our home, just 5 minutes probably from our house. Every single time we drive by, 10 or 15 deer, but only through the winter. And then as soon as right now, they're gone. You won't see them again until November probably. And so deer do different things at different times, and every region has specific deer activities. If you have migrating deer herd, or sometimes deer just move from higher elevations, not necessarily migratory. I mean, I guess technically it is, but they'll move down a few thousand feet during the winter, into some areas that aren't going to get as cold. Especially if you're hunting up north like that in the B zones, it doesn't get terrible up there. So they move really late and they only move a little ways down into the valleys, and then they'll move back up a lot of times. But it's dependent. It's dependent on where you're at and what that herd's doing. And unfortunately, there's not a really good shortcut or rule of thumb or anything. You kind of got to suss them out. You got to figure out, and you spend time there. The best thing I can say is go there during hunting season. Mm-hmm. If you go there during season and the deer aren't there and the fresh sign isn't there, they're not using it during hunting season. I mean, they're not ghosts, so they're going to leave sign. And if you sit there long enough, you're going to see them. And so that's really if you go the week before hunting season, we've got sucked into this many times before. Clayton can attest to this. We'll go scout someplace in May or June, when we were figuring stuff out, because, we're anxious to get in the woods. We want to find deer and all this stuff. And there's deer all over the place. And we go back during season and there's not a single deer there. And it's what happened? Well, their feed shifted. Feed starts dying off in certain places, or they're going to a more nutrient dense feed in another area. And during antler growth season, they're eating one type of vegetation. And then during, the summer season, that's kind of a little more bleak, and they're going higher elevations and feeding different vegetation. So that's a huge question, but I hope that kind of gives you a basic understanding of the answer, is that they're going to move around depending on mostly their diet. And then you just simple things as there's 2 sides to every hill, right? So in the wintertime, our deer hill faces south. So that's why we always see these deer they're feeding in the winter on the south facing slope, getting fresh little shoots and forbs and stuff. During the summertime, that thing gets blasted. So they're on the north side of that same mountain, all in the brush and the oaks, and they're in there hiding in the shade and eating woody browse and stuff. So it's the big thing is the time of the year, and you just got to watch and pay attention to when the deer are there, and that'll tee you off to like, okay, there's a deer population close by that uses this particular spot during the winter. If they're not there and it's hunting season, where are they? Because they didn't go far. They're within a mile. You can almost guarantee that. So it's just
think of it like a puzzle. Like you dump out the puzzle box, and everything's just a mess, and you'll pick out an edge piece, right? And your next objective is, where's the next edge piece? And as you piece these things together, you start to see the bigger picture. It's kind of what it is with a new area with deer hunting. So the four components of a deer's priority, the four priorities of a deer are food, water, shelter, and breeding. Like they're controlled by those four things. So at each portion of the year, their priorities might shift. Like in November, a buck's priority is breeding. In the summer, like early summer, antler growth is going crazy. Their priority is feed. During hunting season, their priority is going to be shelter and then feed. So they're gonna be nocturnal. So their priorities might shift throughout the year. But you can start, like Ben said, if you catalog when those animals are there, then you can start to piece it together. Okay, if they're here, well, let me ask you, when are you seeing them there in that spot?
When I saw them there originally was the second weekend of openers, the one that I was referencing.
Archery opener?
Yeah, archery opener. It was dug fir forest, some ferns and stuff. And I really don't know what they're eating. Like, I know that they browse the ferns as they're walking because you see the tips of it gone. But I know in the bottom of that ridge, though, or that hill, there's oaks. And I've seen that there's one spot where I've seen tracks both times I went there to the bottom of that area in January as well. And I saw tracks there again, but not the sign that I saw before. And there's a lot of rubs up there. So I know that they spend the summer there. But as far as what they do after season really gets going, I'm not sure.
Well, oftentimes in a spot like that, if you're seeing them there in hunting season, chances are they're pretty close by during hunting season. They're just locked in tight. So the more pressure, exactly. The more pressure they get, they don't disappear, even though it seems like it. They just get really, really good at hiding, and a lot of them will go nocturnal. So if you can find out the little micro places in that area where they're feeding in September, I mean, do you rifle hunt or archery or both?
Yeah, both.
Both. So you have more of an advantage in archery simply because there's not as much pressure in the woods. So you can kind of see what the deer are feeding on and where they're going, where the fresh tracks are, where the fresh droppings are. And you can start to piece that together. So when rifle season comes, they're not going to totally vacate the area for the most part, unless it's like a super high traffic area where a bunch of people move in, then they have to. But if it's not, which it sounds like you like to hunt in more remote areas, they're just hunkering down. So if you can find those hunker down spots, those deep cover hideouts, that's where you're going to find success.
And usually those spots entail, especially in that region, we've kind of figured out. And there's, I think, another one of your questions that touches on this, and we can get to it later. But usually those spots entail very steep terrain and very brushy terrain. So when they start, especially blacktail, these western coastal blacktails and all this, Colombian, when they get pressure, we call it the thick and nasty. If you've been around the channel long enough, you hear that term. They're just go to those thick, steep spots, and they will lay down. A hunting mentor of mine tells me that he's seen bucks, and he's like an old timer, and he's killed literally and helped people kill hundreds of bucks. He's like 60 and he's been hunting for a long time. And he still kills 2 bucks every year, no matter what. He's a savage. But he tells me he's seen bucks that have laid down and not moved outside of 100 feet for 5 or 6 days straight. And they'll just bed, the big old smart ones. They'll bed during season, during the peak of the season, during heat, all this, and they'll just not move. And they'll go a little bit at nighttime and they'll come back. He's even done circles, like watched them and done circles around and look for their tracks and see when they've gone out and seen when they've come back. And they'll hold so tight. Even when people walk by, you know, a buddy of ours that hunts Southern California has videos of deer hunkered down and hikers walking by them 20, 30 yards away and the deer just not moving, you know. So they know what they're doing, and they basically just get, like Clayton said, they get super tight to cover and nocturnal or semi-nocturnal and, you know, get harder to kill. But they're there, they're around. If they were there, they're there. You just got to look at those places that have more, they provide more cover for them, because that's going to be their main priority when hunting pressure starts.
Hopefully that
All right.
helps. Yeah. What else you got?
Well, I guess to continue on the steep stuff, I use a lot of the Onyx like slope angle to see if it's like actually traversable, because in this area, like there is a general concern that you'll just get like cliffed out more or less. Or how do you guys use this? Do you guys use the slope angle?
No, we
Sometimes.
just go till we can't walk anymore. Then we'll find a new path.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do.
Yeah, it probably holds me back in some instances, but I found spots on it that are in the middle of a relatively steep hillside. And then there'll be an area that's comparatively flat, not completely, but like, will they like gravitate to those areas? Because one of the things my uncle had told me is that they will take like the path of least resistance, walking the saddles, walking the ridges. Will they also try to gravitate towards a spot on a steep hillside that's compared to the rest of it pretty flat?
Yeah, absolutely. Path of least. Well, first I want to go back to the Onyx part before we jump into this. Any mapping software, Onyx, Go Hunt, all of it, it can be really deceiving, and it can trip you up ahead of time in a good way and a bad way. The bad way is you can fall in love with a spot based on what you see e-scouting, and then you get there and there's nothing there.
It's trash.
Yeah. We've done that. I mean, everybody's done that. And then in situations like yours, like you might get spooked out of a spot simply because it looks just like this is impassable. But when you get there and get boots on the ground, you just go slow and you can hunt it. And I would say there is a level of correctness to path of least resistance. But again, think of the priorities of a deer. It's food, shelter, water, breeding. In this case, we're talking shelter. They're going to find the most shelter in places where nobody goes, and that's the steep stuff. And you've got a beat on the correct method, and that's find really small benches or flats in those steep spots, and they'll hunker down in those areas.
To give you some figures to add to that, Tyler. Sorry, Clayton. I'm just
good.
Excited to share. I shot a deer this year, 2024 season, and hauled it off of a 38-degree slope. So that gives you an idea of like, and Clayton and John have shot. I mean, we've all shot deer on everything we shoot is on steep, it seems like. But Clayton and John had like a rodeo a couple years ago where they shot 2 bucks and a bear, and that was probably 40 plus degrees, like where you have to get trees or something in order to flop the thing against in order to get it cut up, because it's so steep. So don't get spooked off of that. I mean, you have to consider safety when you're hunting on terrain like that and what's below you if you're just going to slip off a cliff. But I mean, some of them you just have to, if you want to get in there where they're at, you have to man up and you go really slow, and you can run into those critters really close in those areas because they're not expecting you to be in there. And if you just go slow and quiet, and going to what Clayton said about the flats, more times than not, the places where we find them hanging out in those really steep spots are just above the flats, on the steep hill, or right, kind of in that bench. They'll use those benches to walk, but we're talking about benches that could be 10 feet wide. Some of them are so narrow, they won't even show up on the grid lines. So you can't really rely on that so much. some of the time they're in wider flat areas, but they're not going to be walking in some meadow out in the middle of the, canyon or whatever. Most likely they may make a fool out of me, but because deer do deer stuff. But for the majority of this, you're looking for just steep hills. And then when you're there, you find a little like washout bowl or a little flat spot, and that'll kind of give them a corridor to walk through. Yeah.
And we were talking about, do deer use those steep areas? I shot a little dinker buck this last season, and I was side hilling through some crazy steep stuff, and I just sat down. And stayed still, stayed quiet. This buck actually walked from behind me. Kind of scared me, actually, because he walked behind me, and I turned. He's 40 yards from me, and so it was kind of a gimme. But he went straight downhill. Like his path of travel was straight down the nose of this. That's another thing I should mention too, is you'll have in the formation of a hill, you'll have like noses that will be a little more gentle than the wash portion. And they'll use that nose because it's not quite as steep and the footing's a little bit better. And then they'll side hill through those like steep wash areas and then angle down on the noses and then side hill. So they know how to traverse the terrain. But they'll definitely travel that steep stuff. It doesn't stop them. And they're not going to leave a covered steep area to go for a flatter uncovered area. It's not going to happen.
The other thing is the path of least resistance thing is a thing, but with blacktails, I mean, we've watched them just doing their own thing. Mosey just straight up over like a cliffy looking ridge knob and just go over. And it's like, well, you're supposed to go around. Deer don't go, but they just do,
Easy is relative. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they've got 4 legs and they live in the mountains. So they're not really concerned about how much effort it's going to take to go up or sideways when they're just walking and feeding. That's not even, I don't even know how much they consider that. It's like the moon thing. It's like a lot of people hang a lot of credence on that. A lot of science has proven it's just non-existent. But either way, I would say overall, especially with migration corridors, the path of least resistance is a serious, real thing. As far as like daily habits and stuff, I don't know that it plays as much of a role.
Well, when we care about it, they're under pressure.
Yeah.
Like when we're out there trying to chase them, they're
right.
under a high degree of pressure. So,
and that's when they don't care as much about the least resistance.
Yeah.
Cool. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, what would you guys say is like some of the more important feeds that you found for deer, or at least how to find them? Because obviously it changes depending on even like one ridge to another. But do you have any tips on how to find what they might be feeding on?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a really big question. You can go like macro with this and just look at like the short answer is they're foragers. So they're not grazers like an elk or a cow or bison. They're looking for shrubs, and they're looking for high quality shrubs. That's why hunting burns is a key, because after a burn, that's when you get those little fresh shoots, like a lot of protein density and that stuff. And so and then when you clear the forest canopy, you get a lot of fresh growth of shrubs, and that's what deer feed on. But that's a tough question to answer unless you're looking at a specific area, because it changes depending on the area. Go ahead.
Yeah, it changes depending on the area and even within an area. Mm-hmm. Like some of the areas we hunt, we'll get in there and they'll be eating gooseberry or chokecherry or whatever, and then they'll change to that stuff will start to die off the later it gets in they'll just be eating whitethorn. They'll be eating, so they just change their diet depending on what phase of life they're in, what phase of the year they're in, what the vegetation is doing, what's dying off, the easy way to figure it out is walk through the field and you'll see their little footprints and concentrations around stuff that they're wanting to eat. I mean, really, the even more than tracks, the big tell is poop. Like that is the number one tell, because they're pooping while they're eating majority of the time. Like as they eat, they just poop. So I've been able to kind of narrow that down in my mind is like, even if I don't know what a bush is, because I'm not a botanist and I don't know enough about shrubs and, stuff. So I may not know what a bush is, but I can either see that they're browsing it just by the fact that it's torn to shreds, or the fact that there's deer poop all around through this particular kind of brush. And I'm like, okay, well, this is where they're eating, because they're eating and pooping. So that's a teller. I mean, bird's eye view, I don't know. It's one of those things is like north face, south face kind of deal, Clayton, you can elaborate on that, but it's a lot of times during the height of season here in NorCal, it's hot and dry. So a lot of the vegetation that's still going to be green and holding any moisture is going to be on the north faces, in those little sparse openings amongst, timber and shade. And then there's the proximity to cover thing too, because they don't want to eat. If there's a big, 50,000 acre burn, they're most likely not going to be in the middle of that burn where there's great browse. They're going to be on the edges somewhere, or if there's an island of brush in the middle of that burn, then they're going to be eating that good forage around that brush so they can get into there and hide when it comes time to bed. So it is a big question, but
I never would have thought about that. That makes a lot of sense, though. I mean, they definitely would be pooping where they're spending a lot more time, and that would be feeding. So that already helps tons.
Because they feed, and then after they're done feeding, they lay down. Sometimes right where they're feeding. Sometimes they'll walk up into cover and lay down. But if the browse they're in is, stomach or chest high to a human, they'll just bed right in there. Or they'll move up, and then you have day beds and they move around as the sun changes and stuff. But yeah, you're going to find concentration of deer turds and wherever they're eating. So
I would say a few highlight shrubs would be, like Ben said, whitethorn. Consistently year over year, we see deer feeding on mountain whitethorn. So you can Google that, see what it looks like. It's kind of like that soft green, like minty color with white stems. Has the little thorns on it. Gooseberry is another one. What's that shrub, Ben? It grows by little water holes. It's got the stems with the big leaves. It's always chewed on. It's
Baccharis, I think. Baccharis.
Maybe so. The name. I'm not a botanist either. But
there's elderberry too. They like elderberry.
That's another one. Yeah. Mountain mahogany.
Like yeah, mountain mahogany. If you find it, they'll get in on that.
Acorns, of course, is another good one. Any sort of fruit, if there's a wild fruit anywhere, they'll feed on that. And then in like grassy, like more savanna areas, clover, vetch, those are good feed sources. So those are kind of a few of the highlights. But yeah, it really does vary area to area. It really does.
All right. Well, I mean, you talked about how that buck you shot, you were sitting down. Are you looking for an area in particular? Like, I'm going to sit down in this area because I've been here before and I've seen sign. Are you sitting down because the feed, you've noticed like the poop and like that there's feed in that area? Or do you sometimes just sit down because you have a gut feeling about it?
Yes. Yes to all of that. So the area where I had never been before. The general area I'd been there, but that particular hillside, never stepped foot on it. But as I was walking in, I walked through a little, it looked like maybe an old lightning strike from a long time ago. So it had some good shrubs in there. It was really small. I don't know, maybe like 50 yards by 50 yards. But I noticed a lot of droppings in there, a lot of tracks, and then they were kind of heading down the canyon, kind of side hilling. And there was just like layers of trails. So I did the same thing. I side hilled. But when you're still hunting, like sitting down and being still and just listening and watching is an art form. And not enough people do it. Not glassing, just listen and be still and let the forest move around you. It's
I think that's like the number. Like you see more animals, and Tyler, you've already said that you experienced this too. You see more wildlife, more animals, and you just start to get a sense. Like if you just sit down and shut up and just look around, you start to get a sense of how things are working around you.
Yeah,
you get a sense, and you can hear, oh, that squirrel's barking off about something over there. There's something walking around down there, or something he's interested. And you just start to kind of tune in to what's going on. But
you pay attention to the wind, and you're looking where the tracks are around you, and like little noises, and like it's just good to soak in those moments. And it's oftentimes it's even when you're still hunting, it's those times when you stop and you be still even for just a little bit, a few seconds. That's when you'll see something, because you stop focusing on your movement and you focus on what's around you.
As a general rule of thumb, I can say this. I'm pretty confident saying this. You're almost always going to be more successful in first and like the first hour of light and the last hour of light. You should not be hiking somewhere. You should already be that somewhere. Like if you have even an inkling of an idea of somewhere a deer might be, you need to be there and you need to be sitting still. Like you defile that first hour of light by moving around during that time, because that is your absolute best chance of seeing them. And by sitting still, that's your best chance of seeing them also. So you combine those 2 points and it's like, okay, you're giving yourself the best chance. If you're in an area you think deer are in, or if you've seen sign in, just sit down and just wait for an hour. Because if they're there, you're going to see them then, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess like, I know like whitetail hunting, I'd always be out there before like daybreak. I haven't really thought about that too much as far as like going out and like hiking in somewhere. So like what time would you guys like, I guess that depends. It's probably not a great question, but
It is a good question. And it does depend though.
How long before the sun rises are you going to try to be there, I guess? And like, I guess there depends if you've been there before. But say you've got like a spot marked out and like you want to get out there, are you trying to be there like an hour before? Are you trying to be there 2 hours before, let everything settle down?
That's a great question. It really depends on the type of terrain that you're hunting and what your goal is with it. Like if we are trying to get to an area where we're going to sit down and it's a condensed area, we're going to try to be there. What I mean by condensed area is, let's say you have 200 yards of visibility and you're surrounded by dark timber. You know it's a feeding or travel corridor, or there's water, whatever. Be there early. Be there an hour early and get settled in and just sit and be quiet. Watch what the wind's doing, get settled in. If it's an area where we're up high and we're glassing a vantage point, we might be there 10 minutes early, because we're going to try to be quiet going in, but it's not as imperative to get settled in the dark. You know what I mean? So it really depends on the tactic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Exactly.
Let me look through. As bow hunters, I mean, you guys have been doing it for a lot longer than you've been making videos. So obviously really, really long time. What was the average shot you guys get? And like how much farther from that shot are you guys trying to like learn how to, or like be effective at shooting? And what is effective at shooting at like those long distances? Because everybody says like shoot farther than you can, like shoot an animal just to have like, I don't know. I'm having a hard time trying to say it, but do like long distance practice. Like, what's your group in long distance practice?
Take this one, Ben.
Okay. So yes, that's a very important question and hinges on ethics, which is, you know, critical when you're having, when you're taking an animal's life, and you want to be as fair as possible. You're excited and you want to make that kill shot, and you know, you've worked super hard for the opportunity, and then all of a sudden you almost have the opportunity in range, but if it's in range or not, you need to be able to make that decision off of an educated number before you get out there. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people just like, my pin goes out to this, or I've practiced at this distance or whatever. So I can't say that I've ever, if I'm being honest, ever actually put a number on it. But if I had to, I would say kind of a good rule of thumb is 50% further than what you plan on shooting an animal at. So if I plan on shooting a deer at 50 yards, I need to at least practice regularly and have an acceptable grouping at 75 yards. So, which, you know, some guys were like, "Oh," but you know, in an acceptable grouping for a deer is the vital zone. So I would say a 6-inch circle, right, is an
Like a
acceptable
cantaloupe.
group. Exactly, when you're shooting a deer. So you don't want a dinner plate group, right? So if you can and you have to use reason for this and kind of like logically deduce. It's not hard and fast thing because I have killed an elk at 90 yards, and Clayton killed a blacktail this year at like 80 or something. Bedded. So, but and I'm not saying that I have 140 yard 6-inch group because I don't. But I did the previous. So the longest kill shot I've ever made was 90 yards, and it was on an elk, which has a, more like a 10-inch kill shot group, maybe even larger if you kind of want to get wild with it. I mean, people have shot them, in a group this big and killed them before. So some of it's to chance, but we don't want to leave anything to chance if we can. So if you figure you got a 10-inch group, and that's what you need to kill an elk in. The year that I killed that elk, I was routinely practicing to 140 yards with my bow, which sounds extreme, but I was really getting into it. And I had about a 15-inch group at 140 yards, which is about a 1 MOA. So I knew that, but when I moved into 80 or 90 yards and was shooting, that felt like a chip shot because I was practicing at such long range that I had like a 6 or 7-inch group at 90 yards. So I knew that I could make that shot essentially. But the numbers are going to change for everyone. And that's an extreme example. And I don't want people to think I'm like trying to say I'm some great archer or bragging about it, but whatever it is for you, you have to be honest with yourself with that number. For people that are, watching this, like practice out to 50, 60. If you get to 70 yards and your groups aren't even hitting your target, then you've got a lot more practice to do before you need to be shooting a 50-yard shot when you've got an elevated heart rate, you're psyched up, you've got a buck fever, So, but I would say for Western hunting, what do you think, Clayton? Average shot 50?
I'd say 50 is probably your average.
Yeah.
I'd say it's pretty rare to have a shot under 50 in a Western setting, unless you're sitting a water hole or you have a tree stand.
Or you're calling a bear in.
or you're calling a bear in. But yeah, for especially for deer hunting, it's hard to get under 50 yards, especially still hunting on a blacktail deer. It's hard. So
yeah,
you need to be a strong archer at between 50 and 60 yards. And some might even consider that as like an unethical shot. But the reality is it's very difficult to get in any tighter than that. So I'd say 50 yards is your breaking point. Under that, I mean, you should be so comfortable at 50 and in that 50 feels like 20. I know that sounds like an extreme, but you should be so comfortable at 50 that it's second nature. That's 50 yards. I can nail that every time.
Yeah, like when we get to a trailhead or when we bail out of the truck and we're getting ready to go do like getting ready to run into the backcountry, and we're going to take a couple test shots. Our target's usually at 40 yards, 40 or 50 yards when we're taking test shots to make sure our bow is on. So that gives you an idea of like, you don't take your thing out and shoot 20 and be like, oh, I'm good, because the tolerances, open up when you get out to 40 or 50 yards. If there's a small problem with your setup or with your shot or whatever, you're going to know it by 50 yards. You may not see at 20, you're going to know at 50, like, oh, okay, it's shooting left 3 inches at 50 yards, which at 20, that would have been nothing. You wouldn't see it. You might have thought you pulled it a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I think it would be highly unethical for a hunter, an archery hunter, to go in the blacktail woods having not shot further than 30, 40 yards. Like you have to be really proficient at 50.
I mean, unless you know for sure that you're never going to take that shot over 30 yards.
Yeah, if you have that kind of mental limitation, if you can say, no, I will never take a shot beyond 40 yards, but good luck with that. So
you're just going to minimize your opportunities.
Right.
Yeah. That's kind of the situation I got myself in at that opportunity that I had in archery season. Those bucks were at 60 yards. We got into like 20 yards in the first group, but they were behind some cover, and they we saw 4 bucks that day, 2 groups of like bedded, like one with another. And the first group we like walked right up to, didn't know that they were there. They were like right on the other side of the trail, in some like moderately thick stuff. You could see them real well, but you couldn't get an arrow through it. And they walked off and we didn't get a shot at them. But the second group was at like 60 yards, and my buddy got buck fever. But I didn't even try to take it. And so I'm just kind of trying to like get a grasp of where I need to be, because whitetail, those guys would never consider like 60 yards. You know, you can't in some areas, you know, just too thick. So
well, hats off to you for showing that kind of discipline. I mean, most people would just lob an arrow, you know, just say, screw it. I just want to see what I can do. So yeah, that's solid to show that kind of discipline.
yeah, having a buddy that was going to take that shot though helped, because at least somebody was going to try.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be good.
Yeah.
I noticed you had another question about hiking speed, like the difference between still hunting versus hiking. Like, is there a breaking point? There's a massive difference between those two designations, like hiking versus still hunting. Still hunting, sometimes it'll be like you're standing still. That's what it feels like. But to be an effective still hunter, like I've heard different metrics for it. You kind of have to feel it out for yourself and your skill set and how quiet you are and all that. But I've heard, like, you know, no more than 100 yards in an hour. I've heard no more than like 2 steps at a time. Like it varies based on the terrain and what you're hunting. And like I said, your skill set. But generally, you should never step into a line of sight that you haven't explored with your binos first. Like that's kind of my rule when I'm still hunting. Ben might have something different, but when I'm still hunting, I'm constantly in my glass. So I'll take a step, and as soon as I can see something new in the topography, I'm going to glass it first before I step into it. And 90% of the time, that's when I see animals, is when I'll get into that next line of sight. I'll pick up my glass and then I'll spot it. In fact, this last season, when we took the subscriber bear hunting, we were still hunting, Nate and I, and we came up on 3 really nice bull, a forky, and 2 really nice bucks. But I was in the glass, and I didn't see it till I popped up the glass and I saw his antlers moving below us. But I don't think I would have spotted it if I wouldn't have been in the glass. So like being in your glass constantly, and it's not so much based on a speed, but it's based on the sight lines that are in front of you. Like you might have a hill that's open, and it really doesn't make any sense to take 1 step and glass it if it's just a hill in front of you. But as you get to the top of the hill and your eyesight starts to open up more of the terrain in front of you, don't bomb into that. Like glass into the next step, look into the next step. Whatever your sight line opens up, check that out before you move any further. And that'll dictate your speed.
I think, yeah, exactly. Good answer. I do the same. I'm kind of like a outlaw, still hunter, because I go a little faster than I should. But I've kind of fallen into a cadence where I feel efficient at, and I'm not going too fast, but I can still cover a good enough amount of ground where if I said I was going 100 yards an hour, I'd be telling big fat fib. I probably go 100 yards every 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes. But I'm walking very quietly. I map my track with my eyes. I know where I'm going to walk. I know I'm not going to step on any brush. And then I walk really slowly while looking around, like Clayton said, looking for those identifying changes. A big tree moves as I'm walking, and now I can see a lane that I couldn't see before. And when Clayton's talking about glassing, he's talking about glassing even 20, 30 yards out, because there may be a shrub, and you hit that shrub with your glasses and look through it, you know, focus your glass beyond that shrub, and you may see a fuzzy antler or an ear flick through that shrub that's only 30 yards from you. And it's like, holy smokes, that deer doesn't know I'm here, and I didn't know it was there until just now. But you would have never seen that with your naked eye, even 30, 40 yards away. So glass is super useful when that's what still hunting is about, is moving slow and glassing a lot. And keeping your hands out, look at the ground, figure out where you're going to step, then keep your eyes out the whole time.
I'll tell you a story where we screwed up on one of the biggest bucks I think I've ever seen, blacktail bucks. I mean, it was a crazy long day. We'd had multiple run-ins with animals. We got into a bear at 60 yards and couldn't get a shot. And like, it's, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes of shooting light, 20 minutes of shooting light left. And we're coming up this steep ridge line, and we're just beat. We've been hiking all day. And so our heads just kind of dropped, and we came out of the tree line, and ahead of us was just scree, and then a few bushes that were, I mean, how tall do you think those bushes were? Like a foot and a
Waist
half,
height.
2 feet?
Yeah, waist height at most. Yeah.
Not big. And there was just a few scattered bushes on this open scree face. And so we got lazy and we were tired, and we walked up to under 40 yards, and this giant buck, like I said, one of the biggest blacktails I've ever seen, came crashing out of that bush. He was just bedded right behind that bush. If we'd have been disciplined and glassing, Ben was in front of me, he would have had, I mean, what do you had, like a 35-yard shot on that thing?
And honestly, if we would have just been looking, we probably would have seen his antlers sticking over the top of that bush.
It's
He
true.
was just laying right there in front of us.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was a south-facing slope, all scree field, and a few bushes. Like, there's no deer gonna be, like, how long have we been hunting deer? There's no deer gonna be there. But we dropped our guard, and boom, there he was. You know,
just when you think you know.
Yeah.
So yeah,
deer stuff.
Yep. Keeping your head up is such a key when you're moving in the woods. So key.
That kind of plays into another question you had. We're just telling all your questions for you. I hope you don't mind.
No.
But the circling around them when you're spotting stock, keeping your distance or whatever, there's a range, and this varies hunter to hunter and area to area, depending on what you're hunting. But we call it the red zone, right? Usually the red zone is like 50 yards and in, and that coincides with most of our shots being around 50 yards, because once you get within the red zone, they know you're there pretty much every time, unless you're doing everything right and you're half Comanche.
Dude, you could be standing still and they'll figure out that you're there. It's amazing the instinct they have. It's amazing.
Yeah. So within that 50 yards, especially when you're stalking a deer, that usually means they're bedded, and they've usually bedded in a place where that they feel comfortable, that because they can hear and see everything around them, and the wind is playing into their favor and all the things, right? So when they're bedded, I try to make, if I'm changing my angle of approach, sometimes you have to hike a mile to get in the right direction. And like you said, if they blow out because you took too long, they're usually standing there eating, or somewhere very nearby. So it may not be over. But if you just charge right at them and then decide when you get, 200 yards away that you need to circle around them, and you try to make some goofy line or take a shortcut because you don't feel like going back around this mountain and back up the other side and over the top, you're going to blow them out. So like, that's the planning is the part where most people go wrong on spot and stocks. And we don't do a ton of spot and stock much anymore. Every once in a while we will, but yeah, the planning part of it is really crucial, and landmarking and all that stuff, picking out, okay, where am I going? And not only that, a big thing that busts guys when they're spot and stock is wind, because they feel where the wind's going, where they're at, but they forget to judge where the wind's going, where they're going to be, and when they're going to be there. Because if you got a big hill right there and you're going to be on that hillside in an hour, and the shade is going to get longer in an hour, all of a sudden that face is no longer getting hit by the sun, the thermal switches and starts slowly sinking down on that face instead of racing up. So then you've got a thermal going up here and one kind of sinking down here, and it changes the whole landscape of how you're approaching that deer. So you got to really think ahead with thermals, with, how noisy is this approach going to be versus this? And it's just a big planning thing.
So for like the thermals, like say like in an hour you did think it was going to like go down, it was going to switch and go down, would you just wait in some instances for that to happen, hope that they're still there?
Sometimes, like when we early in our days, we would take every stock every time, no matter what, and just go hope for the best,
Go get them.
Sometimes it worked out for us. But now we'll sit there and we'll go, man, that buck is 800 yards away and he's in a perfect spot, except for this, or except for that. And we just know it's impossible, and you can try and you get closer or whatever. But a lot of times, like if the wind is just bad and he's on the front of a cliff or something, and it's just like, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen there. The best thing to do is keep tabs on him and see if he rebeds, watch him until he rebeds, or come back tomorrow and try to find him again,
Yeah. And there's consolation knowing that you did everything right, even if you didn't seal the deal. Like Ben had a stock a couple years ago. We spotted these deer as the crow flies close to a mile away. Like and it was down a canyon and steep back up the other side. And the way we had to get to them, because the thermals were going up and they were uphill from where we would come from. There was no coming from the top. It was just impossible. So we had to come from the downhill side, cross the ravine, and come up at a specific angle even to get to where they were. And that stalk took hours. And by the time I got up there, they were gone. We did everything right, though. We did the right thing. Even though they weren't there when we got there, that wasn't the metric for success. It's still, did you do the right thing? Did you play the wind? You know, those are the keys. You can't judge every stock based on did you seal the deal or not. Because you have to show discipline. Because when the time comes and that deer is there, if you lack the discipline, you're still going to blow it.
Yeah. Well, just to go off on a little tangent here, you were talking about deer instinct. It reminded me of this time I was in the whitetail woods, sitting on a ground blind. I was just fallen log that I was sitting at. And on this day, first time I've ever used the grunt call, also the first time I ever got buck fever, blew the grunt call, and maybe 5 minutes later comes this big buck. At this point, it was definitely the oldest class deer I've ever seen. Neck on him like a bull, and came straight to me. I should have drawn when his head was behind a tree, but he came and walked up to me like head on, and the trail I was on, I was pretty close to it. I was probably only like 10 or 20 yards away from that part of the trail, which I hadn't seen a deer come on like that close to me at that point. So I decided that I was going to try to draw when he turned around and try to get like a quartering away shot. Well, he stopped like right level with my shoulder with the tree right there. And I was like, oh, perfect. His head's right behind the tree. I'm going to be able to like turn around. And he's like 10 yards or 20 yards at this point. Dude, this deer baited me. His eyes were that close to behind the tree, and he was looking at me. And I moved the bow this much, and he was out of there.
Yep.
As a whitetail are like that, man. They're cagey.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of that Ocotillo deer in Arizona. Clayton, remember that?
Yeah. Yeah, I set up on a mule deer, and I picked the spot where I thought he would go, and I watched him come from like 200 yards down the hill, all the way uphill, straight to me. Everything was perfect. It was
like
really open. Yeah, it was just perfect. Did everything right, except turn on the camera. And he got to 50 yards, and I waited for him to go behind an Ocotillo bush, his head, and then I stopped him with the old meh. Well, what I did, his whole body was behind he just kept going until his entire body was behind the Ocotillo. And I had no shot. So like did everything right until it was time to draw my bow and screwed up the whole situation. So yeah, that's hunting, dude. I mean, they're cagey animals. They live their entire life based on predation. So yeah, they're tough to kill.
If they don't do it right, they die. If we don't do it right, we don't get to shoot a deer.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
Well, I guess to backtrack again on stalking, at what distance will you you circle around a deer? Maybe at some point in that you have to go in a not favorable wind position, and you have to do a wider loop around them because you can't stalk in from that angle. What would be the minimum that you guys would try to do to get around them?
I say that depends on topography, because and talking about what we were talking about with judging the thermals where they're going to be, because sometimes thermals will go up and just take off of the surface. And if the deer is like up on a bench or something, he may not catch those thermals. But you can't really rely on that. And we've been winded from deer from 800 yards, 1,000 yards before, which sounds crazy. But if you got a good thermal going, they'll catch your scent. I mean, it'll carry.
Yeah, you're not going to escape.
Yeah, that's the one thing is the scent. There's no way. You know what I mean? I would almost say do everything else. But if you're upwind of that deer in any way within 1,000 yards, there's a chance you're going to blow them out. Pretty improbable at 1,000 yards because you got so much diffusion. But all it takes is the tiniest draft of human smell, which is pungent for them to put them on keyed up, on guard, you know. And then it's like you're screwed. Even if you can get in close, you're screwed. You're not gonna make it happen because you want them relaxed, you know. So yeah, I would say it's almost a non-starter if you have a situation where your final approach within 500 yards is upwind of that deer. It's just like you're going to have to either pick a new line or wait till he moves or something.
Yeah.
Or wait till shade or something.
Yeah, there's no cutting corners with wind and deer. It's just not. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Especially blacktail. I don't know a lot about whitetail, but I know that blacktail are very sensitive to people. Wild blacktail, you know.
Yeah.
Well, again, another step back, but when you guys are still hunting, I take it that most of the animals you're seeing don't know that you're there when you're around in time to shoot. Or
correct.
Yeah.
That's the whole goal of still hunting.
Or
if they do know you're there, you weren't doing it right.
There are situations where their instinct will kick in, but they don't know what you are because you haven't given yourself away.
Yeah.
For example, that scenario with Nate that happened, we sat there and watched those deer for like 20 minutes. And they were anywhere from, I think the furthest they were away from us was like 72 yards. And the closest they got was 65 yards. So they're in this, 65 to 72 for 20 minutes. And there was a certain point where we were being super still. The wind was great. Obviously, where they would have blown out. But their senses still caught on that something was off. Like even the slightest movement, because I was filming as I turned the camera, something caught it. And the biggest buck in the group just knew something was up, but he didn't know what it was. So he was looking up the hill, he was stomping, he was snorting. So in that window of time, I could have shot that deer. So there's opportunities where their instincts might be triggered, but if you play it right, you won't blow them out. So even though they might know something's up, you still have an opportunity.
I mean, you got to imagine they're routinely tracked and murdered by lions, mountain lions, who are dead silent, can climb trees, can jump 15 feet vertical, so.
Yeah, what hope do we have?
We're clumsy, bumbling fools compared to a mountain lion. We just have the equalizer of a long range weapon. Consider, whatever, even a bow is long range for an animal. So you got to think of that like, okay, these deer, you got to give them more credit than you think they should have, because and you've probably done it enough, they're hard to fool into thinking you're not there. So.
Yeah.
And sometimes we learned this year that they can know you're there and you can still shoot them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's a line of thinking that it does work in the right scenarios, especially if you're hunting near roads. If you're hunting near a roaded area, you can literally just casually walk. If a deer has spotted you and you've already blown it, I wouldn't advise it from the beginning. But if a deer has spotted you and you've already blown it, you can we tried it this year and it worked. Just like you're going on a stroll. Just walk and don't look at the deer. Look don't talk probably because your human voice might blow it for them. But because if they're 40, 50, 60 yards, 70 yards away, and they're used to seeing people and vehicles go by there, they may just freeze and wait for you to move by. And that would be a pretty deadly error for them. That's when Clayton shot this year did that. He was making a mistake. He got comfortable in his bed and decided he didn't want to move, and we helped him out. So, yeah. Sidebar, sorry.
No, all good. And I guess one of the biggest questions, also probably a really hard one to answer, but I mean, you follow all the Facebook groups and you stick around people that hunt enough, you notice that the majority of people are happy with a little buck or one buck every few years. And then you notice that there's people like the guy you said, 2 bucks every year, and I'm sure that they're not barely legal most of the time.
Not diggers. Yep.
Yeah. Like, what's the best piece of advice you could get somebody? Is it just experience, or is it like a
It's
array of
time in
everything?
the field would be what I say. And which is the limiting factor on most people who like us and everyone else really our major limiting factor is time. Because I mean, if you're not if you have a high an IQ higher than your shoe size, you'll figure it out there. But you have to spend time. You have to spend time in the field. It's like I heard Cam Hanes say that a lot of the animals he's killed hasn't been because he was good at it. It's because he was there. And really, I mean, the more time you can spend out there, it just ramps your learning curve, and that's why these older guys, like this guy that I said was a mentor of mine, he I mean he is a savage, but he's hunted 50 or 55 deer seasons, you know and killed hundreds of deer. So it's like he's got this huge bank of knowledge that it's like intuitive for him now. It's just like anything else. If you're a professional at something, you do that so much. I'm a plumber by trade, and I do it so much. There's so many things in my trade that I do unconsciously, and I just know how. Or someone tells me about something that's wrong with something, and I know instinctively, yeah, that's because of this or that. And that's what we want to achieve hunting. You know what I mean? But there's no shortcut. There's no amount of reading. There's no amount of it, because experiencing it, and like you said, it's experience. But experiencing it is the king. But you can fast forward your experience by having more experiences. So I mean, especially for young guys that are in college or you're not married and have kids yet. Like Clayton and I are both married and have a bunch of kids running around, have careers and own businesses and all this stuff. And so it's like our time has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk over the years, and it's going to happen to you and everyone else too. The more further you get in life and the more attachments you have. So while you're young, put a big fat on ramp on your hunting experience if you can. It's just spend the most amount of time in the woods that you can.
And what you'll find too is that as you build your skill set in hunting, you'll spend less time and be more effective because it's second nature to know, oh, I need to go to that ridge over there. That's where the deer are going to be. Like you'll pick up your binoculars. We do it all the time. Not to brag. It's just we spend a lot of time in the field. So we'll be like, oh, I bet there's deer over there. Pick up our binos. Oh, there's a buck. There's a doe. It's just because it's instinct based on years and years, hours and hours, days and days, hiking around, learning, studying. And yeah, like Ben said, you can't exchange that time. Like it's invaluable. Like there's no replacement for it. But you will find the more time you spend, the less time you have to spend to be successful because you put in that work in the beginning.
And that's where you get this like differential. Like you'll see, some guys, like you said, are really happy to shoot anything. Like honestly, I'm still really happy to shoot anything. Like I shoot small bucks. I have no shame in that. I'm not a trophy hunter. Like if I shoot a small buck early in the season, I'll pass on smaller deer after that. But I'm out there to shoot a deer, man. Like I want to kill a deer. I want to have fun. I want that meat. I want the experience of it. So I'm not usually passing on deer, when I have 2 tags in my pocket. But then there's guys that have piled up all these experiences, like this hunting mentor of mine. He'll watch 30 deer walk by with 2 tags in his pocket because he knows that he can kill a bigger one later, or he knows his area really well. And he's been watching a particular buck and he knows that buck is around and he's waiting for that, or age class of deer. He knows when the rut kicks in because in North A zone, where this guy hunts a lot, we can hunt the rut over here during rifle season. So sometimes you wait during the rut, and guys do this in back east and south a lot when they hunt whitetail. The later you wait in that rut, the big boys start showing up, and so but like for a lot of people, that's not their main objective, and that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. You want to shoot a deer. So luckily we're fortunate enough in California, we get 2 tags. So smoke a dinker on the first one and then hold out for a little while and see if you can find something bigger,
Yep.
Yeah. Just getting one down though, man. That's the goal. Get one.
Yeah. No, I'm not by any means going to pass on the first one, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
What are you going to, when you get your first buck, what are you going to do with it? with the head?
Probably get a skull mount. I just did that with this whitetail I got. I went over to New York, visited my uncle, took a couple extra days to add to a break from school. But first night, spent like, I was probably in New York for like 3 hours, 4 hours. I went out back, like walked up the hill behind his house, and I sat down, didn't see anything. Like 10 minutes before dark, I was going to walk my way down the hill because I've seen him at the very bottom. And like, out comes this doe and this buck is chasing her. And they like, the doe probably got within like 40 yards of me. And like, she started to bust me, but she wasn't super sure of what I was because I like sat back down, like got real small. And I got the buck. And that was fun to like not get anything in California. And then like, first day over there, I got one.
So redemption.
Yeah. Redemption. A little bittersweet though. I still had a couple doe tags though, so I still got to hunt. But with that one, I got a skull mount. I'll probably do the same. I don't have the space for shoulder, so.
Yeah, well, keep after it, man. You'll get it done. I keep a bear tag in your pocket too.
Oh yeah, I didn't do that this season, and I had to let one walk. But
yeah, you got to have that tag, dude. Got to be helping the quota out.
I will.
Well, cool. We'll wrap it up here. Appreciate you doing this, man. This was awesome. Great questions. Really, really good questions. So
thank you. Great answers. I learned a lot.
Well, cool.
And hey, we should, for everyone watching, if you have questions, shoot them in. And I know people do on a regular basis. A lot of people shooting questions, which is super. We get to as many as we can. But if you've got enough good questions, we may have you on for a podcast and explore anything you might have come up with. So
Tyler set the bar pretty high. So this is your bar, folks. But hey, if you want to follow Tyler along, I'm sure you'll post your California stuff on your Instagram. Can I plug your Instagram here? Is that cool?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it's at wildlands_wanderer. So at wildlands_wanderer. That's where you'll find Tyler. And looking forward to seeing that first buck hit the ground, man. It's gonna be cool.
Thank you.
So,
yeah, keep us posted. I want to see a picture when that happens.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely send us a picture. So
thanks.
Cool. Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you.